Tricia. That was great, great presentation. Our next presenter has written about First Ladies, and her name is Maureen Beasley. Maureen is also a member of the National Press Club, where we're being hosted today. She's a biographer of Eleanor Roosevelt and the author or co-author of 4 books. She's a journalism professor emerita at the University of Maryland, and she's known as the Dean of Washington, D.C.'s journalism history. And she's going to talk today about her book, of course, about Eleanor Roosevelt. But I've read her history, just finished reading her book on women journalists in Washington, D.C., and it was a wow, Maureen. I was one of those women in the early history of journalism, and wow, you really nailed it. That's a beautiful, beautiful book. And she has some of her books for sale here, if any of you would be interested in purchasing them. Maureen is the author of the name of your book, Maureen?
The one on Eleanor Roosevelt?
Yes, yes.
Eleanor Roosevelt, Transitional First Lady. I have a copy right here.
Okay. So Maureen is going to speak to us today on Eleanor Roosevelt. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's just a great privilege to be here today on Valentine's Day, a great occasion for us to celebrate. I know our time is running rather short, so I'm going to cut some of my remarks and get right to my subject. Before I cut them, though, I certainly want to thank Janice for inviting me to be on the panel and say what a privilege it is to be with these distinguished women who are truly experts in the field of First Ladies. I want to talk about love. Now, my husband is back there.
Forget about it.
Way, and I'm sure he's squirming because he's not quite sure what I'm going to say. But it's quite safe because I'm going to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt and love. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that Eleanor Roosevelt said on this subject, because Eleanor Roosevelt was certainly a multifaceted individual. She had many, many interests, but she had a private life that did deal with romantic love, and then of course she had the public life, which dealt with love of humanity in general. So I thought it would be interesting for us today, in the spirit of this occasion, to talk about some of Eleanor Roosevelt's comments on love. And I'll try to put them in the context of her life briefly. I have handouts here on these comments that I'll pass out for you. I hope I have enough to go around. I think they're going around. Okay, now Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, wrote about love, private correspondence, most of which now is being dug up by biographers and other people who want to make a fortune out of trying to find something that might or might not be erotic or salacious. She also wrote about love in her newspaper column and in her books that she sold to the general public. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about her ideas on love, on both privately and publicly. And I'll start with a quotation from Eleanor Roosevelt on love. Of course, this is from a poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And when Eleanor and Franklin were first engaged, Eleanor was only 19, Franklin just 2 years older. Eleanor sent him a poem from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And this is an excerpt from that poem. Unless you can think when the song is done, no other is left in the rhyme. Unless you can swear for life, for death, oh fear to call it loving. Okay, so she wrote this in 1903, and she and Franklin married in 1905. Now, I think we know they had a sort of a rocky marriage. And as a little high school girl put it when she called me yesterday to ask for some comments on Eleanor for a project she's doing for National History Week, she said, he cheated on her. That sums it up, yes. 1918, she found out he had. And Eleanor never really forgot that. she had a long memory. And so Eleanor, after she and Franklin decided to stay together for the sake of their 5 children and his political career, decided to move outside of the conventional bounds of an upper-class matron and develop a life for herself, which she did in the 1920s. She began to try to write articles. Of course, she wouldn't have gotten them published if she hadn't been able to use the Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt as the author. But she wrote articles on women coming into politics, which they were doing at that time, because of course women didn't get the vote until 1920. And she began to even have a career as a radio commentator in spite of her rather high-pitched voice. And she was teaching at Todd Hunter School in New York. She bought a part of that school so she could teach there, because Eleanor did not have a college degree. Her formal education ended with finishing school in England at the age of 18. So she was developing herself as a professional woman, and she was making contacts with other professional women, even though she and Franklin were still married. And of course she had nursed Franklin very devotedly when he became afflicted with infantile paralysis in 1921. So anyway, Eleanor was a reluctant first lady. She had a lot of reservations about Franklin becoming president. Why? Because she said, well, I just don't want to sit in the White House and pour tea. She wanted to make the position something, and she did do that, but she didn't know how to do it. Of great help to her in figuring out how she would function as First Lady was a rather unlikely relationship she had with a woman who some have described, well, she's the most mannish looking woman I ever saw. And that was a newspaper reporter named Lorena Hickok, the top woman political reporter for the Associated Press in New York, who covered Eleanor on Franklin's first campaign trip in 1932 and got to know her very well. Now, did these two women have a lesbian relationship? Well, biographers and the authorities are arguing on that. I guess it depends on sort of how you want to define homosexual relationships and erotic relationships and so forth. Anyway, both of them burned some of the correspondence, so we don't really know exactly what went on between them, but we certainly have enough of this correspondence left to know that they were very intimately attached to each other at the time Eleanor first became First Lady in 1933. Now, by 1935, their relationship was fraying a bit. Eleanor now has come into her own as First Lady. She has these press conferences for women only. She's traveling all over the country. She's serving as Franklin's eyes and ears. She is certainly establishing herself as part of the New Deal, as an ambassador for the president. But she's still writing these letters to Lorena. And this is a letter that she wrote to Lorena in February of 1935. I thought it particularly appropriate for this occasion because she contained a valentine in it to Lorena. And here's a comment from this letter. Of course, these letters now have been published. What a nuisance hearts are. And yet, without them, life would hardly be worthwhile. Can't we all agree on that? Your love does cause us some grief sometimes. Then Eleanor included a handwritten verse on the back of a valentine that she sent to Hickok. I tried to look through the literature to find references to valentines she sent to people. I could never find any references to valentines to her family, but I found references to Valentine, to Lorena Hickok, and to Joe Lache, and I'll get to him in a minute because he became her alter ego after the relationship with Lorena floundered. Anyway, this is 1935, and she writes this verse on the back of the valentine to Hickok. May the world be full of sunshine, and our meetings frequent be. Hours of joy and quiet time take us over life's rough seas. Well, that showed that they were having some problems, but Eleanor wanted to work things out. Well, Hickok actually lives in the White House surreptitiously during part of the Roosevelt administration, but Eleanor doesn't see too much of her. Eleanor isn't there all that much, and Hickok has a job at the Democratic National Committee. So Eleanor, in the late 1930s, becomes very attached to a young man named Joe Lash, who was a radical youth leader. She visits him all over the country, and in fact there's one incident in which Lash writes about, published incident, in which Army intelligence wiretapped the hotel room in which Eleanor was visiting with Joe Lash in Illinois at the time before he went off to the Army in World War II. And Army intelligence was trying to find evidence of her engaging in an improper relationship with him. Lash makes a great point when he writes about this of saying, look, I was carrying on with Trudy, the woman he eventually married. Trudy was, unfortunately for them at that time, she was already married. So she had to get a divorce before they could get married. You know, I wasn't intimate with Eleanor, but anyway, Army intelligence thought they might be. So there was gossip about them. Now, here is Eleanor in her My Day column. This is a syndicated newspaper column that's run all over the country, has I think 800,000 readers at one point. And Eleanor's writing about love. And is she perhaps writing about the attachment that she gets to Lash? There is a price to pay for love. For the more happiness we derive from the existence and companionship of other human beings, the more vulnerable we are when there is any cause for apprehension. It takes courage to love, but paying through love is the purifying fire which those who love generously know. So Eleanor realized that love is not an easy issue. And in fact, in February 8th, 1944, she writes again about love in her column. And by this time, actually, she had taken a trip to the South Pacific to visit persons in service there. Also, part of that trip was to see Joe Lash, who was then stationed in the South Pacific. And this is what Eleanor says. It is obviously true that the first flush of being in love may change into something deeper and calmer, or more superficial. I have known only a few very happy marriages. By that I do not mean just people who get along together and live contentedly through life, but people who are really excitingly happy. These people have somehow preserved the ability to rejuvenate their love so that neither the man nor the woman need to wander off to find the romance they long for somewhere else. Well, was she talking about her own marriage, perhaps, as one that was not too happy? Well, we know that Franklin is in the White House, and of course there's a lot of biographer speculations on what sort of relationships he had with some other women. But we know that Franklin and Eleanor were sort of like two trains in the White House. You know, they were on parallel tracks, but the trains didn't intersect all that often. Well, this is what she writes Joe Lash in a letter, which he then publishes later on, this same period, April 27, 1944. Joe, dearest, one can be free within the law, and one can get over the particle of dust feeling by being oneself to the utmost, and yet being related to the great upward struggles, all that one loves. Human beings, nature, ideals, kinship with God and man add to the sense of relatedness. There's a point beyond which one cannot explain or think, though. One can only feel and believe. So I think at this time, maybe Eleanor is sort of coming to the realization as she ages, as we all do, that romantic love is a sort of a part of a circle of life. Now, 1960, she published this book. It was 2 years before she dies in 1962. You Learn by Living, and it's supposed to be a guide of how to live as a mature person. She says, someone once asked me what I regarded as the 3 most important requirements for happiness. My answer was, a feeling you've been honest with yourself and those around you, a feeling you have done the best you could in both your personal life and in your work, and the ability to love others. But there is another basic requirement, and I can't understand how I forgot it at the time. That is the feeling that you are, in some way, useful. And it is its own reward as well, for it is the beginning of happiness. I think we could all agree that Eleanor Roosevelt led a life of usefulness to humanity. Let me just wind up her career here in my remarks. After Eleanor's relationship with Joe Lash cooled a lot, she became quite close to her doctor, David Gurevich, and she spent the last years of her life living in New York City in a house she shared with Gurevich and his wife Edna when she was not living at her Valkill cottage at Hyde Park. According to Edna Gurevich, Eleanor could love this man because he could be trusted to keep within the bounds of an idealized love. But, according to her secretary, Maureen Corr, Eleanor's true love remained Franklin. She always insisted on being called Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt. We know that. She wrote that in her advice column, Ladies' Home Journal McCall. Corr remembered Eleanor constantly talking. Now, this is after Franklin died in 1945. Evidently, she remembered him more affectionately, perhaps, than living with him at the time, like her to express herself. Corr remembered her constantly talking about what Franklin did, or what Franklin said, or how Franklin thought about this or that. And every time she mentioned his name, you could hear the emotion in her voice and see the glow in her eye. So I think in conclusion we can say that Eleanor Roosevelt, probably our most active First Lady, truly lived out and to some degree wrote about, part of that damn mob of scribbling women who Janice wants to honor in a long overdue museum. Truly lived out, to some degree, wrote about her own efforts to come to define love at a period when she was a First Lady. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maureen. This was unscheduled, but I wonder, since we have someone in the audience who has firsthand experience with First Ladies, Anita, if you'd like to come up and say a little bit about First Ladies as writers. I know there's Abigail Adams, and of course your boss really championed women writers and writers in general.
Well,
Would you do us the honor of saying a few
sure,
words?
I would. I appreciate it very much. I wasn't scripted or prepared, but I thought when I met, first of all, this was so great. I learned so much. Of course, I'd like to come back to see the new exhibit. I haven't, and Pat, I'm very fond for everything that you're doing, and Pat has been a big supporter of the conferences that we're hosting in partnership with American University and the White House Historical Association and the National Archives, in partnership with the Presidential Libraries, to take the world of First Ladies to audiences all over the country. This is, Yemen's work was done by Mary Regula and Congressman Regula to establish the First Ladies Library, and I have been very honored to have the opportunity to work in 3 White Houses with 3 First Ladies, really, Nancy Reagan, Barbara Bush, but most closely with Laura Bush as her Chief of Staff, and I'm very much a supporter of the kinds of work that all of you have been doing for so long, certainly much longer than my time here in Washington to learn about First Ladies and tell their story. These are truly partners to the presidency. And they are women, they are not just women as First Ladies, they are women leaders. And they have always been at the bellwether of changes in our society throughout American history. And for any of us who study them or read about them or have gotten to know them, we're so delighted that institutions like the Smithsonian, recognize that it's more about showing the clothes that they wear, which is a snapshot to them and their characters, but also the work, the incredible work that they've been engaged in that has really left a lasting legacy on the imprint of our country. And that's what we try to do with these conferences and working with firsthand resources like all of your wonderful work, which I'm going to get out of the AU library, where I'm housed as soon as we go back and read more about certainly that transitional figure, Eleanor Roosevelt. But I think, one of the things, unfortunately I'm heading to a meeting at NPR, so I can't stay too long, but I did want to say one thing that I found in my research on First Ladies is just how important those firsthand accounts of their words, their emotions, and getting that on paper. And for as much as a lover of literature and as literacy that Laura Bush is, the most difficult thing was getting her to write a diary, and she didn't in the entire 8 years. And she was, First Lady at a time in our country that was consequential and controversial. She felt, she shared the experiences of a woman like Lady Bird Johnson, again, wartime First Ladies, controversial husbands as presidents as their husband, and yet as much as she just lived her life through books and reading, found it very difficult to take the time to do a diary. And I would check books out of the White House Library, Lady Bird Johnson's diary, which I love. I think it's really one of the most wonderful books out there in their own words. I would check these out. I would send them to her. And actually, for a birthday gift for Mrs. Bush one year, I did find on eBay a first edition signed copy, Lady Bird Johnson, of her memoirs, and I gave it to Mrs. Bush, saying, if nothing gets you started on this, I don't know what will. But when she finally did sit down to do her memoirs, she wanted it to be a literary piece, and she did have greater recollection than she thought. And we spent a lot of time before we left the White House making sure we had all the schedules of those 8 years accurate, that all of us that were involved in her activities, that we pulled from the archives our notes that were on different events and things that we had seen firsthand. And then it allowed her to write a really wonderful book. But she's certainly not the only one. All of our First Ladies, whatever we can capture from their own words, is just really important to help tell the story and the history of our country. I'm reading a galley copy of a wonderful book right now by an author, Jane Hampton Cook, who's written a couple of books about faith and First Ladies. But one she has coming out in May around Mother's Day, which I'll just put on your radar screen, is called American Phoenix. And it chronicles the life of Louisa Catherine Adams, our only British-born American First Lady, and her husband, John Quincy Adams, at a really interesting time, not as First Lady, but when he was our envoy, our ambassador to Russia, at a time when the country, we were a country in name only at that point. And by having ambassadors like John Quincy Adams tell our story to powers, the real powers on the world stage, like Russia at the time, and get them to validate our country or to open up trade with our country, and the role she played as a diplomat at that period under really excruciating circumstances, being separated from her two oldest children and facing illness, and the challenges. And also, as a new nation, we were not a wealthy nation, and so we didn't live like other diplomats did at that time. And reading this story, you just see really what patriots these really women were in our country, and how they helped to forge our nation and to ultimately tell our story. And I think it's important through resources like the National First Ladies Library and the Smithsonian, and through these education centers, to keep telling the story of these women to new generations and materials that are attractive to them. I'm very pleased about the C-SPAN series over the next 2 years. I'm a member of the board of the White House Historical Association, so we are a partner to the C-SPAN series. I'll be on a panel on Monday at the Decatur House with other First Lady practitioners, those of us that have worked for First Ladies over a number of administrations, and also, help tell the story about this series, which I think is quite remarkable, and so glad that we're investing time and resources and taking his story all over the country. So thank you. I wasn't prepared to comment, but I appreciate the opportunity to comment, and I'm just so honored to have shared a couple of minutes of the stage with the three of you. Thank you.
Any questions for our great speakers? Wow, this was really an unforgettable experience at the lunch. It was wonderful. Any questions for any of our speakers? Anybody want to ask them any questions? Any follow-up questions? Okay, well, if there are no questions, you're welcome to socialize and meet them. And I think Maureen's book is for sale. Anybody else have their books for sale? Maureen's books are for sale. And also, if you want to stay for the program honoring the 4 states that we're honoring this month, please feel free. Thank you. Thank you so much.